Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Dick Schwartz. Dick began his career as a systemic family therapist and an academic. Grounded in systems thinking, Dr. Schwartz developed internal family systems, or IFS, in response to clients' descriptions of various parts within themselves. He focused on the relationships among these parts and noticed that there were systemic patterns to the way they were organized across clients. He also found that when the client's parts felt safe and were allowed to relax, the clients would experience spontaneously the qualities of confidence, openness, and compassion that Dr. Schwartz came to call the self. He found that when in a state of self, clients would know how to heal their parts. Dr. Schwartz is a featured speaker for national professional organizations, and he's published many books, such as No Bad Parts, and a second one on relationships called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. And he's written over 50 articles about internal family systems. So, Dick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Maybe my first question is just a general check-in with how are you doing right now? There's a lot going on in the world. There's just some people are stressed out. Other people are surviving on just a human level. How are you?
I'm doing better than surviving. It's hard to say that I'm happy all the time because of what you're talking about, but I can access what I call self. And when I'm in that state, I feel pretty good, even though things are crashing around me. And that's what I'm trying to help people access so that we can do better than survive during these times.
Yeah. And could you give folks, we were talking briefly before starting recording, there's a lot of videos and materials, et cetera, about the basics of internal family systems. And I would definitely direct people to some of the interviews on things like We Can Do Hard Things podcasts, Good Inside. That was great for me because I'm also a parent with Dr. Becky. And, Tim Ferriss was a pretty extended podcast. And so those are some of the places, in addition to the IFS Institute website, where folks can get some of the deeper introduction to the basics of IFS. But I still wanted to give folks some broader overviews. And so I'm curious, just could you give folks who maybe haven't heard of IFS some of the basics that they can get a grasp of some of the concepts?
Sure. So this is the 41st year I've been on this journey. And back in those days, I was shocked when my clients started talking about, they called these parts of them that would take over and make them do things they didn't want to do. And because they were talking about these parts as if they had a lot of autonomy and they were sort of full range personalities inside of them. And the only thing I knew about that was from used to be called multiple personality disorder. So I thought, okay, maybe these clients are sicker than I thought. But for some reason, I stayed curious about what they were talking about. And then at some point, I noticed that I had them too, and that some of mine were equally autonomous and in extreme roles. And so I just got more and more curious about the phenomena and ultimately concluded, just to shorten this whole intro, that everybody is a multiple personality in the sense that we all have these, what I call parts, other systems call subpersonalities or ego states, and that they interact inside in patterns like a system, like an external family, hence the name internal family systems. And turns out we're born with them and that they're all valuable. Hence the title you mentioned, No Bad Parts. They all have wonderful qualities and resources to help us in our lives. And trauma and attachment injuries or bad parenting force them out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be quite extreme and destructive, but maybe were needed back at the time of the trauma. And then they're still living back there. They still get frozen in time. And they also accrue what I'm going to call burdens, which are the extreme beliefs and emotions that came into your system during the trauma or the attachment injury, and sort of act like a virus that drive the way these parts operate thereafter. So good parts that, again, like kids in a family, get forced into extreme roles and carry these extreme beliefs and emotions and are frozen in time. And as a systems thinker, like you said, I got interested in not just what each part was like individually, but how they operated as a system. And so I created this map that's held up over these 40 years, which includes these very young, sensitive parts of us that other systems call inner children, who, before they were hurt, were these precious parts that gave us all kinds of happiness and playfulness and loving and openness and creativity and so on. But they're the ones that are the most sensitive, so they're the ones that get hurt the most, or terrified the most, or carry the most emotional pain from what happened to us when we were young, usually. And once they get burdened with all that stuff and they get frozen in those scenes, they have the power to overwhelm us and take us back into those scenes and make us feel what we were feeling back then. And so we have almost a natural impulse to lock them away inside so we don't have to re-experience any of that. And everybody around us tells us to do that. You know, they tell us to just move on, don't look back, let it go, not realizing that in moving on, you're locking away your most precious qualities simply because they got hurt. And so we call those exiles. When you have a lot of exiles, you feel more delicate, the world seems more dangerous. So other parts have to leave their naturally valuable states and become protectors, some of whom protect by trying to manage your life so that your exiles never get triggered again. And so maybe there are parts that monitor how close you let people get to you so that they don't get close enough to hurt you again, or maybe they try to make you look good so that you don't get rejected again, or they try to make you achieve at a high level so that accolades to counter the worthlessness. They try to take care of others and don't let you take care of yourself so everybody depends on you. So these are some of the common manager strategies. There are a million of them, and they often become these inner critics because they're yelling at you to try and get you to work harder, or get you to look better, or to try and keep you small so that you don't take any risks, you don't get hurt. So those we call managers. And most of us have a lot of those parts. Other systems call them the defenses or the ego. So they're on all the time. They're just running our lives, basically. Sometimes, despite their best efforts, the world has a way of triggering those exiles. So these raw flames of emotion tend to try to overwhelm you, or do overwhelm you, which is a big emergency. So there's another set of parts who are standby. And when that exiles gets triggered, they immediately go into impulsive action to get you away from those flames of emotion, or douse them with some substance, get you higher than them until they burn themselves out. So we call those firefighter parts. And most of us have a kind of hierarchy of them. And if the first doesn't work, you go to the next, and top of the hierarchy is often suicide. But along the way are addictions and dissociation and rage and so on. Whatever kind of reactive, impulsive part you have. So that's the map. It's pretty simple. Protectors, subsets of which are managers and firefighters, both trying in different opposite ways often to contain and protect these exiles. So we often have these polarizations between managers and firefighters over how best to protect you, which you hear these battles inside, or you hear the shame of the manager after you've done a firefighter activity. But yeah, they're all good parts just in these extreme roles. And psychotherapy and traditionally and culture has demonized lots of them and tried to make you try and ignore them or get rid of them, which only makes them more extreme. So that's the basic map of the parts. But the big deal about IFS, I just stumbled into, which is that there is, in addition to these parts, what I call the self with a capital S. And I stumbled into it in the sense that as a family therapist, I was trying, maybe I'm trying, Ryan, to get you to get to know your critic better. Now that I'm hip to the fact it's not what it seems, it deserves to be appreciated for how it's trying to help you and protect you. I'm trying to have you listen to it, and suddenly you're furious with the critic. And it reminded me of family sessions where I'm having two people talk to each other, and it's going okay, and then a third one jumps in and sides with one against the other, and it goes south. We were taught as family therapists to get that third party to just relax back in the room and not interfere. So I thought maybe the same thing's happening inside of people. Maybe as I'm trying to get you to listen to your critic, a part who hates the critic has jumped in. And so I would ask, could you get that part to just give us some space? Basically the same intervention I was doing with families. And to my shock, people could do that pretty readily usually. And they go back to just not only being curious, but also be calm relative to the critic or be even compassionate toward it. And in that state, things would go really well. The critic would share its secret history of how it got forced into that role and how other parts it's protecting, and we could start to change this internal system from that information. And I would do that same process of just getting these other parts to open space in other clients. And it was like the same person would pop out with those same C-word qualities of calm, but also confidence and curiosity and compassion, and also courage and clarity, creativity, and connectedness. So those are what we call the 8 C's that characterize what I'm calling the self. And I'm here to say after 40 years of doing this work, we can safely say that it's in everybody. It can't be damaged. It's just beneath the surface of these parts such that when they open space, it pops out spontaneously. And it knows how to heal, and both internally and externally. And so that's the big deal about IFS. Yeah, I can pause there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And for folks who are listening later in this interview, we're going to try to do a live. I do internal family systems therapy weekly. And so Dick has agreed to work with some parts of me. And so folks can see how this applies in action. You know, maybe to bring it home for folks, I really love the story of Ethan Hughes in the book, No Bad Parts. And because I think a lot of listeners probably have a part of them, since, you know, it's social entrepreneurs and activists and MBA students and impact investors, we all sort of want to do something for the world. And we can lead, I think, with a protector that is very judgmental and isn't actually creating the world we want. Can you speak a little bit like how, like you're seeing in sort of activist or social justice spaces and maybe social entrepreneurship, how like leading from certain protectors is not actually going to be beneficial to society?
Yeah, not only not beneficial, but generally gets the opposite impact of what you're hoping for. Because like with Ethan's, and also I do work a whole lot now with social activists of all kinds, and they generally have what we might call a righteous part, that protector that sees their opponents as stupid at best and is trying to educate, and comes with a lot of judgment and contempt, sometimes not even hidden contempt, but they often try to hide it. And yeah, that backfires in general. And so what I've helped people I work with do is work with that part, find out what it's protecting, which is often one of those exiled parts that is stuck back in some scene where injustice was happening to them. and heal that part. And we didn't get into how you do that. But as you say, people can see that on YouTube and stuff. And once that part is healed, then that righteous part is willing to take more of a back seat and also isn't nearly as contemptuous and extreme, and becomes more of an advisor to what I'm calling the self, who then leads the social activism. And it's not like once you heal these exiles, you no longer have motives to do the work you're doing. It's just that you can do it much more effectively, because now 3 of those C-word qualities are clarity, courage, and confidence. And fourth of the 8, being compassion. So you're conveying your message from those C-word qualities rather than from this, why don't you people see me, see what's really happening? And people get a much better response, as Ethan described in the book. And so that's what he's starting to try and bring. I have lots of social activist leaders now who are trying to help their communities become more self-led. And they're all finding that it's much more effective.
Yeah. And, maybe even going just like into Ethan's story a little bit. I mean, since it's public in the book, I feel like it's okay to discuss it. Could you give the highlights of like some of the, like, I remember he was feeling this social justice warrior part of him that just wants to like slay injustice. And then, but that part of him could also judge his wife and like be really rude and not actually get things done. And you had helped him trace it back to, I think, an accident where his father had died and been hit by a hit and run. Yeah. And he had chosen that night, I think, to go to an arcade instead of go to a basketball game with his father. And so he was sort of like, oh, the superficiality will kill. Yeah. That was sort of part of his motivator.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we got that boy, that young teenager, out of that scene and helped him unload the shame and all the feelings that he got from that time. And then the crusader part was willing to take a back seat. And Ethan's still going wild with his social activism. We had him present at our annual conference last year, I think. And do you know Ethan?
I haven't met him personally, but some folks on my team know him.
Yeah, he's a great advocate for a new economy. I mean, he lives under the whatever it is, so he doesn't pay taxes, and
the poverty level,
and does it happily. And he's quite an inspiring guy.
Yeah, I remember a picture of him. For folks who don't know, we keep referencing Ethan. He's the founder of Possibility Alliance. I remember, and sort of shows what it can be if you live sort of fully off the grid. And I remember even a picture of him, which is counterintuitive, but people taking solar panels off of his house, which is usually seen as like oh yeah, we need to go back to fossil fuels. But it's like, no, I actually don't use electricity, so I don't even need solar panels.
He has people visiting his house. Thousands of people come to see how he does it. Yeah, he's very inspiring.
And I'm curious, in the book, one of the reasons I wanted to reach out is, again, like this isn't just what I would call like bread and butter therapy in the realm of psychologists. This is more systems level change. And you reference Charles Eisenstein, which has been on our podcast, and Ethan, and, social activism. And I'm curious, as one of the questions I've had is, I'm not 100% sure this is true, but I remember some teachings. I practice Buddhism, and one of the, I think, early teachings of the Buddha was around, you just focus on the individual self, and then society sort of transforms from that like individual work. But I think with IFS, there's like the individual work, but I see IFS, you've talked about IFS applying at like systems level, like country or community level. And could you speak a little bit, like what did you have in mind with like, how does IFS apply beyond like an individual working with their parts?
Yeah, actually, your question is timely, because about last winter, I made a decision to shift my career arc, because up till now, it's been training therapists and running training programs and so on to try to bring IFS to larger systems and to leaders who have influence. And so since then, that's mainly what I've been doing. I have to fulfill some commitments still to be able to fully do that. And there are lots of people now who can take it way past what I can take it, who are doing that and using it to try and bring more what I call self-leadership to all of these very influential larger systems. And so much of it is parallel. Like if you look, just take a country like the United States, and you can see huge numbers of exile, but in a person would be considered exiled parts who feel totally cut off from power and are suffering. I think somebody said this is the first generation whose income is going to be less than their father or their parents. And so they feel like they're going the wrong direction. And that's some of why they're interested in someone like Trump, who they feel like speaks for them, even though he doesn't. He lies and he does, but it's because they're hurting so much. And so there's a huge amount of pain, just like somebody with a lot of exiles. And when you have a lot of exiles in any level of organization or organism, you're going to have very extreme firefighting. So you have all these very extremes on both sides, really. So there are people taking very extreme positions now and polarizing with each other around how best to run this organism that has this huge pain in it. And there's no self to be found, what I call self, even in the leaders, and even on the left. And so that in people tends to spiral and wind up with all kinds of symptoms. And that's what we try to reverse when we're working with clients who come with their symptoms. Yeah, so for me, it's all quite parallel. And what I find and what keeps me going and keeps me hopeful is I'll work with a client where there's no self to be found and there's these huge polarizations and there's massive numbers of exiles inside them. And as soon as we get what we call a critical mass of self access, things can change really quickly because all the parts relax much more when they find that there is this unbiased leader who can actually hear both sides and actually start to help them help them out of their extreme positions and heal these exiles. And so, writ large, then maybe if we can get the critical mass of self in the country, that a lot of that can be reversed as well. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Are there any examples of like a company or organization or like community or country that you've sort of been trying this out on that could maybe ground it?
Yeah, I haven't, but I'll give you a couple examples. I'll give you one in particular. There's a guy named Bill Isaacs who is a coach and has been working with the World Bank and the IMF to depolarize things between the board and the staff around the decisions they make and try to help them become more self-led in their decisions so that they can actually help the countries that really need it. And he's having a lot of success. He's been doing this for a couple of years, just using IFS principles and technique.
Awesome. And I was even thinking of one of the challenges maybe in a setting, in a group setting or like a system setting is, and you tell me if this is true in your experience, it feels like, at least for me and maybe others that I've seen you do work with, it's like if you start to do work, like it often comes back to like your parents, like, oh, my dad treated me, and maybe in certain professional settings or public settings that getting to that root shame and like how our parents treated us can be almost like too deep that could like block the system from healing. I don't know. Does that make sense at all to you?
getting to it can block the system?
Well, just like how I'm imagining this IMF, like for example, and the board and the working with different folks. And yeah, I'm just trying to imagine how some of the exiles and protectors, which can be like some of our most ashamed and protected parts, like can show like creating a safe enough space to work with enough people on those like deep individual traumas. So I'm just sort of grappling with the challenge, I think, of how our culture like allows for people to sort of talk about like, oh, how I was raised and how my parents treated me, and then have that show up in a professional way to change the system.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. Let me add something to all this. So what I've talked about so far are the burdens that came into you from your direct experience in your life. There's a whole other class of burdens that have become increasingly key in the IFS world, which are what we call legacy burdens that didn't come from your direct experience. They actually came from your ancestors or from, it might have happened, traumas might have happened centuries ago, and they just get passed down through the generations or to your ethnic group. And then there are these legacy burdens that are just floating around in our culture. And these attach to our parts too, and they have the power to drive overreactions to things. And for me, many of the conflicts in the world are driven by legacy burdens. The way enemies see each other are very colored by what happened in the Holocaust, for example, or we do a lot of work now. We have a very diverse community now. And so I'm doing work with Black people around the legacy burden of slavery and so on and so on. And so not sure why I got on that, but
I think it was just, talking about legacy burdens versus like why that might show up in an organizational context.
Yeah. And so a lot of what I hope to achieve are what we call collective unburdenings, so that large groups of people simultaneously can start to access their legacy burdens and then unload them together. And that process gives me a lot of hope because I've done it with reasonably large groups. And I think if the world knew about that, it would make a big difference.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, and maybe the legacy burdens is how you're kind of calling ancestral trauma. Like for white people, we don't often talk about it, but there's several authors who have spoken about in Europe before coming to the US or like the North America, white people were torturing and murdering each other and like putting each other on racks and pinions and pouring hot molten metal on each other. And then we sort of brought that to, like, let's say you're in Ireland and you're, getting colonized by people who are leaving England and Scotland because they are fleeing the British. And then everyone just sort of like ends up in the US with all these like traumas, and then enacts those traumas on Indigenous folks and Black folks. And so how does like that show up in some of the work that you're...
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And those legacy burdens allow you to dehumanize other people and treat them the way your ancestors were treated in this torturous way. And so if we can unload those and people see through the eyes of self rather than through these burdened parts, they see the humanity in other people, and they can't go ahead and inflict those things on them. And so that applies to the current day, too.
Yeah. Well, maybe before we turn to maybe doing some work together, I did have one other question around something that's been coming up for me is, I think it dovetails with all of this, is I sort of believe at our root, many of us are very joyful, playful, creative beings. And then you have this, legacy burdens plus capitalism and imperialism and patriarchy, and that sort of like sits on top of all that initial joy and creativity and play and sort of crushes it. And then we're all trying to like find it. And so one thing I wanted to ask you about this, because my journey to date has been, how do I go into the darkness and the traumas and like whether it's legacy or parental or things like that, and do like mindfulness and IFS therapy and try psychedelics and like, sort of all the different things to address it. And there's a part of me that still believes like if I just keep digging that I'll suddenly like find happiness at the end. But I've also noticed there's this other part of me that's like, but it's beautiful today and you can choose to be joyful now. And so I've really tried to cultivate a lot more gratitude and play and joyfulness just without having like figured out all the burdens. And I'm curious, like, do you have any thoughts on that? And like, does that show up for you in your work?
So it takes a long, long time to get all the burdens, all the exiles out. But as you do some of it, you have much more access to these young parts with all their joy and playfulness. And so as you get more access to them, it does change the way you feel in the present. And while you're not in an active session trying to heal other parts, your life starts to feel much, much lighter. And you still, because self sees injustice, self's committed to changing that, the outside world, you also continue to do the work, but from a lighter place.
Yeah, that seems to be true in my case. And yeah, I think there's also like, there's just this layer of maybe it's access to being able to choose joy and creativity and play when that was maybe too burdened before or too many exiles.
Exactly right. And
yeah,
there's a lot of people lobbying for a ninth C word, which would be choice. And I've held out because the others are all qualities and choice isn't a quality, it's an action. So, but choice is a big deal. And as you unburden, you have much more self-leadership, which means you can choose what to focus on and you can choose to live in those 8 C's.
The Buddha is he needs to have the eightfold path. So you got to keep with your 8.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, since we have about 45 minutes or so left, what if we turned to, maybe this will also help bring it home for folks, is a little bit of work and demonstrating this in action. I talked to Dick ahead of time and we sort of talked about this part of me that is very skeptical about the next economy and systems change and racial, like whether any of these things will actually work. It's like, it just believes like, what are we doing? Like, this is all BS. And so we thought maybe we'd do some work on that part and see what comes up.
Sounds great.
So, yeah.
So you ready?
Yeah.
So Ryan, just find that voice or thought pattern in your body or around your body.
So what's coming up is in my stomach, there's like a knotted contraction feeling.
Great. And how do you feel toward it as you notice it?
Right now, I feel a little bit, there's a sort of an exhausted, or it's like feels tiring. Like, oh, I've tried to look here before, but it doesn't work. So there's a like sort of feeling of just like, oh, exhaustion towards this knot.
Okay. So we get that part, but we're going to ask it to give us the space to just get to know this knot better and actually help it not feel so pessimistic. So let's just see if the one who's tired of it can give us a little space in there and step back.
Yeah, it's willing to step back and allow further exploration.
All right, good. And so focus on it again and tell me how you feel toward it now.
Now what's coming through is a fear or anxiety or like a apprehension, a little bit of like, I can't tell if it's the part itself like releasing some of that, or if it's a protector that's trying to stop me from looking in there.
Just ask which it is.
Okay, it's a protector that's saying, it's too scary to look in here. Don't look in there.
Okay. So we're going to pause with it for a minute and ask it more about its fear. What's it afraid would happen if you actually look?
It doesn't know. It's just like the lack of understanding or knowing what might be in there is sort of incredibly fearful, creating a lot of fear.
It's really scared of the unknown in there. And
yeah.
So let it know you get that, but ask it how old it thinks you are.
The answer that's coming back is 6.
So let it know when you were 6, it probably needed to protect you this way, but let it know how old you are and how you can handle a lot more than you could when you were 6. And see how it reacts to that information.
It's surprised and a little mistrustful of saying I'm older now. Like it doesn't quite want to let go of the belief that I'm 6.
Okay, and ask what it's afraid would happen if it let go of that and actually trusted you could handle more.
Then it's like it itself wouldn't know what to do. It would be sort of hanging in sort of a blackness, like a space, just like unknowing what to do.
Okay. Ask it what it would like to do. If it really trusted that and it didn't have to do this job, what might it like to do instead?
It says it would love to support healing in whatever ways are needed.
So tell it that's going to be its new role. As soon as it lets us heal this, it'll be freed up to do that new thing.
It's very happy about that. It's like, oh, sweet. I can switch roles that easily.
Very much. And so, Ryan, go back to the knot.
Yeah.
And how would you feel now to know what's in there?
Now it's more curious and it's more, just sensing into like the different shape of the knot a little bit.
Yeah. So follow your curiosity and just ask what it wants you to know about itself. And don't think, just wait and see what comes.
Okay, what's coming through is it's like a baby version of myself that's screaming and is like terrified. And for some reason, there's like a fire alarm bell. Like, so it's like cacophonous is
Okay.
like what's happening.
How do you feel toward that baby?
Honestly, there's a little recoil of like, whoa, like that's so much emotion. I don't know if I can handle that.
So we're going to ask that part to maybe go into a waiting room until we're done. It doesn't have to handle it. It can trust you to handle the baby. See if it's willing to step out.
Yeah, it's begrudgingly, it's like muttering and walking away like, fine.
Okay, so we appreciate that. And then go back to the screaming baby and tell me how you feel toward helping it now.
Sort of like an overwhelming feeling of like, oh my gosh, this poor baby, like, and sort of wanting to cradle it.
Go ahead and, if it's possible, go ahead and cradle it with that compassion.
It's calmed. It's like a little calmer, but it's still sort of like caught in like almost like it's dissociated and still screaming.
Okay. But so you are cradling it?
Yeah.
Well, let's just do that until it kind of feels that it's safer now and it's not alone.
Yeah. It's sort of like, its eyes were like this bloodshot color, like rolled up, looking into the sky. And now it's sort of like turning its eyes towards my face. Like, what the hell? Who's this?
So just keep letting it know who you are and why you're there. How you do care about it.
It's calming down and it's asking if we can turn off this cacophonous fire alarm that's just ringing. And
So go ahead and do that.
okay. Off.
How's it doing now?
Yeah, it's sort of whimpering a little, but like sort of understands that like I'm here now, and I think it's still just got some emotion left in it, but it seems much calmer and like sort of open to why I'm here.
Good. And see if it wants you to know more about what's happening for it back there.
It's almost like even the idea of exploring where it was is like pretty scary for the baby. Like, don't even look in there. It's too scary.
The baby's saying it's too scary.
Yeah.
You sure it's the baby and not some protector?
Okay. I think it's the baby saying it because it's afraid that I might put it back in that place and like leave it.
Oh, okay.
So that's why. Yeah.
So tell it's really the opposite. That we want to get it out of there. And so we want to know how bad things were so that we'll know where to get it out of.
Okay. It's willing to sort of take me back to this place it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So just stay with it. Everything it wants you to get and feel and sense and see about how bad that place is, right? You just stay with it.
This is interesting, but it's taking me to this barren, sort of like burning, like almost like a forest, or I can't tell if it's the whole earth is barren and burning or if it's like this area, but it's like the baby was the only thing here and like it's everything else is destroyed.
Okay. So just stay with it until the baby feels like you're getting how scary that was, whatever else it felt.
Now it's coming through is it wants me to know how scary my dad was growing up. Just
Okay.
like, yeah.
Are you open to knowing that, Ryan?
Yeah.
So tell it to go ahead and really let you get everything about that.
Yeah. I think what it's showing me is when it was afraid of my dad, or that it was almost like he wasn't in control. It was like being controlled by it's like sort of what's coming through is like the sort of the legacy burden component of how he treated me and just how powerful and overwhelming that fear was, but also that he wasn't in control and I wasn't able to stop to do anything. I was paralyzed by
Your power.
fear. Yeah.
So let them know you're getting that and how terrifying that was.
But the baby is almost what I'm gathering it's trying to communicate is thank you for trying to understand how terrifying it was, but it never should have happened. Like, and so it's still very confused that it's still sort of very upset about it, the fact that it even happened in the first place.
Well, let it know that that's true. It never should have happened. How is it for it to have that validated?
It's comforting because it felt like it was its fault for, like it should have happened because it was doing something wrong.
Yeah, so this is really important, Ryan, for you to help it understand that's absolutely not true. It was just about your father's legacy burden.
Baby's like, fucking legacy burdens. It's just like,
I agree. But he believes you now?
He believes me. And now it's like it's almost back a little bit to where we started with just like the baby starting to feel like these legacy burdens are so powerful and so entrenched that like, what can we really do? We can't actually change this.
Oh no, that's totally untrue. We can send them packing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is a shocking answer to this baby.
Yeah. So is it ready to do that?
To get rid of all legacy burdens?
All the ones it carries.
Yeah.
Maybe we should get it out of that time first with the father.
Okay.
Ask if it wants to leave that time and place with you, or if it wants you to do anything with the father first.
I think it's conflicted. Like, it really doesn't want to give compassion and empathy to my dad because of what my dad did.
Not going to do that.
But at the same time, it's wanting to just give him a hug and be like, you just had all that shit breathed through you. And so it's not your fault and it's your fault. It's sort of a duality.
Yeah. So Ryan, enter that time period and be with that little one.
Yeah.
He needed. And then go ahead and do that for him while he watches. Do both. You can do both with the dad.
Yeah. There's something about the belief that the baby has about legacy burdens never being able to be addressed, and then forgiving my dad. Like, if it believes that you can never address a legacy burden and it feels like it can never forgive him, that's what it's coming through.
Just tell him that that's not true, and we can prove that to him shortly.
Okay. It's like, all right, let's prove it.
Okay.
It's a cussing baby, apparently.
We need to get him out of there first. Let's maybe take him to a good place.
Yeah, there's a theme park I sometimes have taken other parts to that they just get to play. So maybe we could go to that theme park and hang out while he has some space to offload.
Take him there and see how he likes it.
Yeah, he likes that place.
Okay. But tell him he never has to go back to the time and the father, and you're going to be taking care of him this way now.
Okay.
And with that, see if he's ready to unload whatever burdens he got from the father, or the terror also he felt, or whatever else he carries that doesn't belong to him.
I think he's ready, but he still is like, wait, how do you get rid of a legacy burden? It's still confused about that.
Doesn't need to know how. We're just
okay. We just do it.
All we need is his desire to do.
Okay. He's ready.
And ask him where he carries all that, in his body or on his body.
Definitely the same stomach knot, I'd say, that we started with.
Okay. What would he like to give it all up to? Light, water, fire, wind, earth, anything else?
Let's do water.
So take him to the water. Tell him to let that knot just go into the water and dissolve, whatever happens to it. He doesn't need to carry it anymore.
Okay. I'm going to let him do his thing for a minute.
Yeah.
I think he's got some good release of that knot, which, may also be like a long process, right? Like, it might take days or just sort of let all that knot out.
All right. Just check.
Okay.
How's it going so far?
It's working, and there's I don't know if parts sometimes pop in on this process too, but one seems like a part is like, when will you know it's done? Or like, how do you know, it's...
Ask it to give us the space.
Okay.
Relax. We'll know when
it's a very, it's a very worried part, I feel like, about,
yeah.
I'll let it step back.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I feel like it's been able to get that out, and just the stomach itself is it feels like the tension in the stomach has slowly been released. Like there's still a little bit of just sensation from the process, but it does feel like, and then also like a inside my throat, like a more like a softness that I maybe didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And while that's happening, you could tell the part to invite into its body qualities it would like to have. And you can just see what comes in to replace that knot.
Yeah, it's sort of taking in trust. It was like the first one. Belief. I think it hasn't believed. And then just love and joy as like part of that, filling up that space that was the knot before.
Great. All great qualities for a former skeptical part.
Yeah.
Well, how's it feeling now?
Feels pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, before you come back, though, Ryan, stay in there.
Okay.
And invite all those protectors we met along the way to come in and check this out and just see how they're reacting.
Yeah, it's almost like the imagine they're kind of standing next to each other and whispering to each other, like, well, if these large legacy burdens or systems or things can be changed, and that really changes everything, because I'll admit that when you very confidently said, "Oh yeah, we can definitely get rid of that," it was like, "What the fuck? Like, are you serious?" It was disbelief.
Yeah.
And so they're sort of muttering about like what's possible.
Yeah. And that applies to your external work also, because they were all getting pretty pessimistic, it sounded like.
Yeah. Should I stay in a little longer, or?
No, if it feels complete, you can come on and back. How do you feel?
I feel better. Yeah, it's there's definitely what came up. What I'm sort of trying to make sense of a little is the way that I felt towards my dad and like his behaviors, and belief that I was paralyzed and helpless to maybe address him, partly because it felt like it wasn't even really him. He was like animated by these other bigger pieces.
Yeah.
And then that being a frozen perception that's been sort of applied in life. Like, well, we can't really do much about these big things because, let's be real, let's be serious. Like, things are going to happen. So,
Yeah, it's really important for someone whose role is as important as yours is to keep the hope alive, and to not have that kind of pessimistic position all the time. So,
yeah.
really glad we could do it. It may well be, there was a period where you were witnessing this little one where it saw kind of a barren, I forget what it looked like.
Yeah. The barren earth. Yeah.
Barren burned earth.
Yeah.
That may be a sign of where the legacy burden started. Sometimes these parts sort of channel that. Maybe that there was some kind of war or something. So that's a possibility.
Yeah. What was also coming through is that's the future of Earth, is like as climate change destroys everything or something, or like, it becomes a barren, burning wasteland that like, it wasn't I don't typically think about those types of things. And so clearly it may be tied to it.
So, yeah, I really appreciate your trusting me enough to do that big piece. I think it'll serve you well. And you've probably heard this from your own therapist, but it's really important for you to follow up on your own and to visit that guy every day for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure he's still doing well, and trust you're not going to forget about him.
Yeah. I'm curious if, since you've done this work and you said you have that sort of part yourself, do you have any sort of advice for listeners around like, working with that, the part that believes that it's just not worth it, and that, like maybe anything you've learned from your own introspection or from work with others?
Yeah, well, I should have said I had that part. Now it's an entirely different role, and actually is encouraging because I worked with it. I did a similar kind of piece that you just did, and that's all these parts need. They're stuck in hopeless situations fast, and then they apply that viewpoint to everything.
Yeah.
So once they trust, they don't have to protect us, or that the exiles are stuck in the past. Their protectors feel like they have to protect us by not getting our hopes up.
Yeah.
And once they see that that's not needed anymore, they can allow us to be hopeful and keep going. And, my guidance is that there is a chance we could turn things around. It's not, the odds aren't totally in its favor, but that's what keeps me going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the joy play part of me is, I can be like, it's an election year and how is Trump, like just get into all the negativity. And then the joyful part is like, so beautiful out and my kid wants to go swimming. And like, so how do you, like, I feel like that's actually a radical way of sort of changing. Yeah, it's sort of like a radical act to actually just allow ourselves to be happy and joyful, especially in this world.
Yeah, and that's such a problem for so many activists that become so consumed by the awareness of suffering everywhere.
Yeah,
that it takes over their lives and they burn out. So it's really important to, even though things look like shit, to be able to access self, which does allow for joy in moments and also does allow you to not be as, what Buddhists call, attached to making everything better. And so you can still have a life and at the same time be aware of how bad things look.
Yeah. Well, as we, move towards close, I'm curious, what is the, you mentioned shifting your role. Like, could you give folks a sense of like, what are you looking forward to or excited about in IFS work you're doing in the next couple of years? Like,
yeah. So I'll continue to work with these social activists and their communities. And I've been doing ketamine and IFS workshops, co-led by Sonny Strasberg and my wife Jean, where we'll do it by invitation. So we're asking leaders of all kinds to come and do the kind of healing that you and I just did, which is expedited by the medicine, and then have them during the retreat, which is usually 5 days, connect with each other so that they can join forces more. And so that's part of the vision too. And we're also going to launch a training program for coaches so that they can bring IFS to their clients, to their CEOs and heads of nonprofits and things like that, and try to bring more self-leadership that way too. And So we have a bunch of different targets. Education is one. There's a program called PAUSE, PAUSE, that is in a lot of schools now, trying to help kids and teachers teach from self, but kids know how to heal their parts when they get bullied or something. And trying to bring it to medicine, just it's a big, big vision of what's possible. Just very excited by what we've already been able to do. How many people are coming and asking for us to, people that can take it places I can't, coming and asking for to be trained and or help doing it.
And then one of the questions we like to ask and sort of is, what do you need right now? And how can the listeners help you grow the next economy?
What do I need?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. We have a lot of people with a lot of money now wanting to help. And that's great. And I just haven't put together a proposal that we can present to them. So what I need, and actually we just hired someone, Joanna, whose job it is to try and sort of collect all these voices and put together some kind of prioritization of what we want and where we're going. And she just started last week. So, but if you, Ryan, or your followers are interested, I can have her talk to you about possibilities you can think of and see what can happen.
Love it. And very last question is, how can folks learn more about your work? I know you're a big Instagram person. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if you are. Just kidding.
I'll know from Instagram, but we do have a website. It's ifs-institute.com. And a lot of resources on that. There's lots of videos of me on YouTube. And we have all these books, which are also listed on our website. And our training programs are very hard to get into now because the models become so popular. But there is something called the Online Circle program that people can get in. It gives you the basic concepts, and that's people find very useful. And we also have a foundation called the Foundation for Self-Leadership that funds all kinds of things, including research, which we need. So if people were moved to donate, that would be a place to do it.
Well, Dick, I can't thank you enough. This has personally been really powerful for me. And I think the bringing of this to movement spaces and activism and social entrepreneurship is really powerful, because a lot of people need this and are sort of doing good work, but could be more self-led from that place. And so I just want to appreciate you.
You're very welcome. And yeah, I've really enjoyed our interview and grateful for you being so vulnerable.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.